What do you need to do with your Vikings running backs on Monday night? How should you treat the Bucks passing offense in Week 16? And what do you need to know before you submit those championship lineups this weekend? Plus, the 2019 Footballguys Players Championship leader Abib I knew I was going to butcher this. Agbetoba is here to co-host the show with me as we talk Juju Schmidt, and I can't talk at all. Juju Smith-Schuster, Will Greer, Kerryon Johnson, and much more. Much easier names to pronounce. We've got a great show for you, I promise. Abib Agbetoba is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now listening to the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Dave Gerzak. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for football analysis from the best fantasy players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Dave Gerzak.
With the master rhymer, that's the lead behind the video rapper. You know the truck driver, tapper. Down goes another rapper, on to another rapper. Punch up to that.
Thanks a lot, Rob, and early Merry Christmas to you, my friend. Greetings and salutations to all of the Bulkaholics and Gerzak addicts tuning in tonight. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com. I am, of course, your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. My co-host is normally the patron saint of fantasy football, the Dizzle, Dave Gerzak. However, tonight we have a very special co-host. He had 3 teams in the 2018 FPC after having one league he's been in playing for 15 years with college friends that got him started. Obviously, when you spend so much time researching and prepping for that league, it only made sense to branch out and put that work elsewhere, or that info to work elsewhere. This year, in the 2019 version of the Footballguys Players Championship, he had 15 teams and fortunate enough to have 12 of those 15 make the playoffs. One of those teams is on top of the other 8,399 other squads with just 1 week to go before the $250,000 grand prize will be awarded. Please welcome in my co-host for the evening, Abib Agbetoba. Abib, season's greetings to you, my friend, and thanks so much for hopping aboard tonight, man.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
This is rarefied air because we normally don't have the leader of a national contest the week of Week 16, and I'm sure there's some nervousness on your part. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of anticipation on your part. How are you feeling right now?
Feeling actually pretty good. Definitely quite a bit of nervousness, anticipation. Kind of sometimes wish you could fast forward through the weekend and just see the final results, but we'll just try to approach it like any other week and see what happens.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because I think if I was in a similar situation, I'd be very excited to see what happens. But there's probably points this week you're like, just get it over with already. Just move on. I want to know if I'm going to come out on top. I want to know how close I'm going to come right now. But I think it's going to be an enjoyable weekend, a stressful weekend, but hopefully an enjoyable one for you as well.
Absolutely. And funny story is that I had no clue that I was atop the leaderboard until you actually reached out to me, and I was kind of questioning. I was like, why, why would they want me to co-host a podcast? And so I went through a couple of my teams and noticed that one of my teams was constantly showing up on the leaderboard, and realized that, that's because I'm, atop the leaderboard. So yeah, definitely, very, very pleasant surprise, and very, very fortunate to sort of kind of be in that position. So we'll definitely see where it takes me.
and we're going to talk all about it tonight over the course of the next hour plus. Shout out to the chat room right now. It's already hopping in there. Feel free to post any questions you guys might have in there. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, the show is at HSFF Hour. I'm at Eric Balkman. Facebook.com/HSFF Hour is where to reach us there. And, of course, if you want to give us a buzz and talk with me or Abib tonight, 347-426-3682. That's 347-GAME-OVA. HighStakesFantasyFootball@gmail.com is where you can reach us, our producer and mutual friend Rob, my best friend and audio engineer Bryce. We'll definitely get those questions to us coming up later on in the fantasy feedback portion of the show. I want to remind everybody that if you have not signed up for the FFPC Playoff Challenge, you can do that right now at myffpc.com. This year, for the first time ever, an industry record $500,000 grand prize, just $200 to enter that. And, of course, the Football Guys Playoff Challenge, the inaugural FPC, $100,000 grand prize at just $35 an entry there. You can import your lineups pretty easily on all those. Once the playoff teams have been announced, you can start assembling your teams in minutes. Very, very difficult to master. Very, very easy to put those lineups together. Rotoviz.com/podcast this week. You can hear from Aaron McGurian, who I ended up speaking with. He's in 13th place in the FFPC main event right now. A lot of good stuff in there about setting championship lineups and sort of how he built this team and got to this position. A little bit of a longer podcast, too, than we normally do. But it was fun. It was enjoyable. You can check that out at rotoviz.com/podcast, Apple Podcasts, and, of course, the Blue Wire Podcasting Network. Abib, let's talk a little bit about you when you are not playing fantasy football and not realizing you're leading the entire Football Guys Players Championship. What are you doing for a living?
So I'm actually treating patients. I'm actually a physician by day, ear, nose, and throat, but subspecialize in endoscopic sinus surgery and skull-based surgery. So that kind of keeps me pretty busy. So it's kind of nice around this time of year when I'm busy with that and not having to get too nervous about being number one, I guess, overall in this Players Championship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have other people that are depending upon you at this point, and bigger fish to fry, as it were. So when you're drafting these teams, and I noticed I think you had a handful of teams that you drafted at the end of August, but by and large, your teams that you had drafted in the FPC were either in the first week of August or like the last couple of weeks of July, which I don't necessarily consider early per se, but it is, not peak drafting season then. Is that sort of your wheelhouse? Is that when you normally like to draft teams in this competition, is sort of the end of July, early August?
To be honest, in years prior, I'd really only drafted a few teams. This is sort of kind of the first year where I kind of went all in or drafted double-digit teams. And, I mean, in retrospect, I learned that, at least for me, I felt drafting early on and then drafting later on seemed to be sort of kind of the best pockets where I felt like I was really able to get the best value in terms of draft picks. And I think early on, before, there's sort of kind of a groupthink mentality, before everyone sort of kind of developed their draft plan, you can, hopefully if you're following the NFL during the off season, you're able to get sort of kind of a jump on things before most people are able to really dive in and delve into some research. And then later on, I think it's probably a combination of just having a lot of, more novice, not to say that I'm not a novice, but, more people who are a little bit newer to the Players Championship, really trying to get in some teams before the season starts. So I noticed that the drafts tend to be a little bit more unorthodox and didn't necessarily follow, the drafts that kind of happened in between, as far as, I don't know, just what am I trying to say? But as far as go ahead. Sorry.
And I don't know if this is what you're trying to say, but I can tell you that I think the ADP early on is sort of, I don't want to say it's formulaic or cemented in, but it's a lot more rigid. Things definitely open up towards the end of August, and you get, like you said, some people who maybe haven't drafted a team yet this season, and it's their first one. It's very, very difficult to put player valuation in those drafts because the fluctuation of players could be, 2 or 3 rounds apart in some cases, depending upon the draft, where
Absolutely.
You really don't see that in like June or something like that.
Absolutely.
Abib, let me ask you this. I don't know if this was not this team that is in first place right now in the FPC. You drafted it on July 28th. I don't believe it was your first FPC. I think you drafted some ones before that. And I'm also not sure if this was the first one you drafted from the 12 spot. But you're picking 12th in this draft. When you knew that you were going to be you had the last pick of the first round, did you have any particular strategy going in of how you were going to lay the foundation for building this squad early on, being that you were picking at the very end of the first round?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to go in with any rigid strategy in terms of going wide receiver, running back. And, really what I try to do is, if possible, draft the best player available. But I think in this particular draft, I went wide receiver with Julio and Michael Thomas, and they just happened to be, my top 2 or 3 wide receivers, and felt like that was the best move in this particular draft. This year, I didn't have really a good beat on the running backs. Early in the draft, I was very high on Zeke and high on CMC. Not so high on Kamara. I basically have 0 Kamara shares across the board. Just felt like him being able to produce at the TD rate he did last year was potentially unsustainable. And didn't have a lot of Saquon just because the unknown behind the quarterback situation, the new offensive scheme. Although they had some improvement in the O-line, I just wasn't quite sure. A lot of his runs kind of came in big chunks, and I just wanted something that was a little bit more stable. So, the running backs to follow, there were just so many question marks, and it was really hard to determine which one was actually going to provide you RB1 value. I would have loved, obviously, to have more Cook, but I had him last year, and I think just personal bias and all the injuries that we had to deal with, and, their O-line last year was just in terrible shape. There was just something that couldn't get me over that mental hurdle, so I didn't have as many shares as him as I would like. So the kind of natural decision was just to take, 2 of the top receivers that I would just happen to be high on this year, and was fortunate enough, obviously, to have Michael Thomas carry me throughout the season.
Well, and another guy that carried you throughout the season was Lamar Jackson, who you had drafted as your backup quarterback in round 14 of this draft. Now, I'm guilty of it, too. I let him slip in drafts. I did get him in a lot of spots this year, so I was really happy about it. But I did let him slip much further, obviously, than he should have given his output this year. What do you think high-stakes drafters missed on with this guy? Why did we let Lamar Jackson slip? I know he's a quarterback, and quarterbacks typically do slip a little bit, but why did we let him slip so far in drafts this year? What did we miss on him?
I kind of go back to this a lot. I think the groupthink mentality was, everyone's sort of trying to look for the new Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you had a small camp that was in favor of drafting him early. Potentially we looked at Deshaun Watson, but he was going in the 4th and 5th round pretty early as well. But I think everyone kind of put their eyes on Kyler Murray as that new potential Patrick Mahomes. And I was a fan of Kyler Murray, but I was not a fan of where he was going. I didn't see the real value in how high he was going in drafts. And so, my whole approach to drafting quarterbacks is really trying to get the guy who can do it both through the air and on the ground. I feel like it provides you a stable enough floor, but then also provides you some very, very high upside. So I tend to have quite a bit, or I had a large share of both Lamar Jackson and Cam throughout, all fantasy formats. So obviously I didn't see or foresee this happening in terms of him exploding the way he did. But there were a number of different articles that I sort of kind of read through where you could see the potential for that, and the floor seemed very high, giving the potential for a 1,000-yard, rushing season, or at the very least 700, and what he could do through the air. And a big thing for me too was the coaching change, the new OC, knowing that OC had been in San Francisco. And was able to do what he did for Kaepernick during a time period where he was, putting up, maybe not as good a stats, but close to it. And so I sort of kind of saw that, and obviously with him going so late in drafts, it just seemed like the obvious choice that this could potentially be a steal. So I didn't rely on just drafting him. I wanted to get 2, and in some cases 3 if I wasn't comfortable with my QB2, just to make sure that I had that position that really provides you the most points from week to week locked up. So it's sort of kind of my approach with Lamar and drafting QBs in general.
Abib Agbetoba, the leader in the 2019 Football Guys Players Championship in Week 15, joining us on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour tonight. Co-hosting with me, Dave Gerzak, should mention, has the week off. You jumped on the waiver wire quickly in this league this year, Abib. Terry McLaurin, DJ Chark, you acquired both of them. Both of them are fairly young guys, unproven guys. They don't play on high-volume pass offenses. What did you sort of see in McLaurin and Chark that knew you wanted to get them? Were you aggressive on these guys, or did you just happen to put a price enforcement type bid on these guys and you ended up getting them? How did you acquire them, and why did you want to make sure you got them?
Yeah. So Terry McLaurin, I have to be honest. So during the off season, I spent most of my research discussing and debating with a close friend of mine, Dr. Deo Adesai. I have to throw his name out there. And we spent a lot of time kind of going back and forth on certain players, and it really kind of shaped who ended up in my draft pool. And at the very end, or close towards the end of draft season, he had mentioned this player, Terry McLaurin. And I'd never seen any tapes on him. I'd never watched him in college. But he had brought him up as potentially being the number one guy, kind of that guy that kind of comes out of nowhere. Just because, he's in he's playing with the Redskins, which obviously weren't getting much pub during the off season, and had kind of a shaky or questionable QB situation. So, after kind of seeing him after that first week, I felt like it was a good time to pounce with the potential of, getting a team's number one wide receiver in such a deep format league. And then when it came to DJ Chark, that was definitely more of a guess than anything else, to be honest. I didn't really necessarily buy into Westbrook as the number one guy. Not saying that I was against that, but I felt like there were so many different variables. New quarterback, sort of kind of a new offensive scheme, a number of new wide receivers with Conley coming in, and they had a lot of young guys, and I think Marquise Lee was also in the conversation. So I think a lot of people were high on Westbrook, and maybe rightfully so, but I didn't want to spend that type of draft capital on him. And then obviously after seeing him kind of go off in KC, I thought, again, you have the potential to have a team's number one wide receiver. And no matter the situation, if I have the opportunity to pick up a number one wideout for a team, I want to have that person on my team, because you never know during any given week against a tasty matchup, you might plug that person in your lineup, and they may explode. So.
Yeah, well, sometimes guesses work out, and you need those to get to the top of 8,000 plus other teams. So it certainly worked out. I think a lot of things have worked out on this team. I was actually looking at your roster prior to the show, and this is a very deep team. It is a very talented team. A lot of times when we get to this level in the championship round, we'll talk to guests, and they'll have maybe one tough lineup decision, maybe two, because it's very difficult to build loaded rosters, to build a 20-team or a 20-player team where you have several decisions. You do have several decisions. There are a lot of great players on this team with great matchups. What are the toughest ones that you're looking at here for Week 16 as you try to figure out which 10 are going to be submitted?
Definitely, you have a number of wide receivers between Julio, Michael Thomas, DJ Chark, like you mentioned, Terry McLaurin, Allen Robinson, Golden Tate, John Brown. So week to week, it was definitely tough. I tried, I don't necessarily agree with the start your studs, but there are certain studs where you are obviously clearly going to start them regardless of the matchup, such as like Michael Thomas and Julio Jones. But the rest, kind of just make the decision based off of matchup and, and a couple of other things that, were obviously pertinent, such as Terry McLaurin's QB situation, having a young QB in early on. for the most part, he's spent a lot of time on the bench. Golden Tate, his QB situation, he spent a lot of time on the bench. So those decisions have been a little bit easier to make. This week, it's definitely going to be tough deciding, aside from Julio and Michael Thomas, which other wide receivers are going to crack the lineup. I really, really like Terry McLaurin's matchup this week. The Jets' backfield, defensive backfield, is really beat up, and we may be seeing Haskins getting a little bit more comfortable. Throughout the entire season, we've always kind of heard the narrative of these two sort of kind of having chemistry because of their work in college, and had never really see it kind of come to fruition until the last few weeks. So he's definitely in contention. DJ Chark, faces Atlanta, and Atlanta seems to be Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to their defense. So who knows? And then Allen Robinson, you would think against KC is a great matchup, but based on the numbers, KC's been somehow pretty stout against holding wide receivers down. So definitely some decisions to make there. And then in addition, my flex, Kenyon Drake, which is definitely the running back who kind of, I would assume, propelled me to this number one position. Last week was a tough decision in terms of deciding to start him. And really just kind of came down to looking at Arizona's schedule over the last few weeks and noticing that they had faced some really, really tough defenses. I'd seen kind of Cleveland as this team on the decline and sort of kind of losing identity. There was a lot of, just sort of kind of chitter-chatter around the team, and felt like them going away would be a nice opportunity for the Arizona offense to sort of kind of take flight. He had been seeing quite the volume of carries, but just hadn't had a chance to break through. And so, thought that took a chance and thought that this may be a week where I could get a touchdown out of him, maybe 70, yards on the ground and a few catches. And obviously he was able to do a lot more than that. And lastly, one of my biggest decisions, I think, is going to come down to my tight end. And this is probably one that's just going to come down to right before, kickoff. And I'll probably go back and forth multiple times, but trying to decide between Austin Hooper and Jacob Hollister. I mean, we have Hollister who's playing Arizona. We all know what Arizona allows to opposing tight ends this year. It's a golden matchup. Then we also have Austin Hooper. Obviously, we know what he's done this year and set a very stellar year. And, Atlanta and Matt Ryan, they have very limited options when it comes to the passing game. A lot of guys that Matt Ryan may not necessarily trust. We know he has some trust in Hooper. So it'll probably, in the end come down to which one finds the end zone. But that's going to be a tough decision in itself.
Yeah, no, you're making a lot of strong cases and thankfully, you have some other guys on your team that have carried you throughout the season, but they don't have the greatest of matchups this week. Emmanuel Sanders against the Rams, John Brown, who's at the Patriots this week. I think those guys are kind of easy spits. Matt Breida, obviously, you're not going to play him given what Tevin Coleman and Raheem Mostert has been doing. So that's good. So some of this will set itself, but I look at the kicker position. You will not have you will not have a hard decision here because you have one kicker on your squad, Brett Maher. And I should bring this up this is a good PSA for everybody. Greg Zuerlein, if you are looking for a kicker this week and you have Greg Zuerlein in your lineup, he's questionable, may not go. And the Rams did, in fact, work out one Brett Maher. Yeah. So maybe you'll get lucky and they'll sign him and he'll be in your lineup. But Abib, what was the strategy? Was your team, did you just want to keep that extra depth and roll the dice and just keep one kicker? I mean, certainly Brett Maher hadn't had the greatest of seasons so far, but he was not having a good season all year. So I look at it from the standpoint of like who could have projected that Dallas would choose to cut him. I don't know anybody who saw that coming at this point in the season. Take us through the strategy there of keeping the one kicker on your roster.
Absolutely. I mean, that was just an absolute killer. And I have probably, I think one or two other teams in this same situation. When I draft kickers, I draft like most, draft them towards the end. I'm not necessarily in the camp of wait until the very end to draft your kicker and your defense. I kind of know the statistics. I know the randomness of it, but I feel like if you have a good beat on who may be a good defense, and you have a good beat on who's going to be in a good offense that may get you more points than usual, I'm not necessarily trying to, pick the number one kicker, but I want to be in that top quarter to give myself sort of kind of an advantage. And that's how I approach defenses too. And this year, whether it was a good strategy or not, for this year, it ended up working well. I drafted 2 defenses, and I have on quite a few of my teams New England's defense, the Patriots, and believe it or not, they have carried me quite some way too. So, but you're kind of getting back to the kicker situation. I actually did draft any Brett Maher. I drafted a lot of Robbie Gould, and we know that he got injured, so I had to sort of kind of pick up a kicker. And it really just, I was looking at Dallas' schedule, and I kind of like to look for a bend but don't break defense that they'll be going up against. They seem to have quite a few of those on the schedule, and also in game scripts where they were going to have to, they weren't going to necessarily just be able to, take their foot off the pedal. So I felt like it was a good situation where, a kicker would, these would be situations where I get a few field goals and, a few extra points and just kind of have, be stable in their position. And really, I probably should have paid a little bit closer attention to the struggles that he had been having. And that's probably one of the sort of kind of, I guess you want to call it rookie mistakes, is not really evaluating every single position. And, kicker is one that we, I think many people, including myself, tend to sort of kind of, place little thought or effort into.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sometimes I'm guilty of it too. I rarely, analyze or look at my kicker situation. I'm constantly looking at backs and receivers and tight ends, and sometimes we gloss over that. So it happens. It happens to everybody. You are not the first person, by the way. You are far from the first person that this has ever happened to as well. So we'll see what happens there. As we're talking with the leader in the Football Guys Players Championship, Abib Agbetoba, here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, Eric Balkman coming at you. The championship round, it's upon us. You've set your lineup in there the last 2 weeks for more than one team. Do you set your lineups differently? Do you take a different approach? Do you spend a little bit more time analyzing matchups than you do in the regular season, Abib? Is there more of a nuance to doing it maybe a little bit different way when you get to this point of the season?
Honestly, I just try to approach it, week 16 the same way I approached week 1, with the caveat that obviously we have more information, so you sort of kind of just add new intel, new analysis as you sort of kind of move along. The first week is tough because there's a lot of unknowns, and by week 16 we kind of know, who people are. So I really approach it the same way in terms of, how I prep for the week. Oftentimes I'll hear analysts talk about, balancing between someone with a high floor and boom bust and things like that. And my approach is just really trying to start in the guy who I think is going to perform the best, not necessarily who has boom bust potential, but just who I feel like is going to put up the most fantasy points. And that's just, it's kind of the approach I take. I try not to really deviate from that too much.
Abib, I want to sneak in an email here from Jamie. This is Jamie in Sudbury, Mass. He writes, "Hi, Abib. Have you looked at the teams behind you in the standings as to who they have on their roster compared to who you have before setting your lineup? Good luck in the FPC, man." That's Jamie in Sudbury, Mass. Thank you for the email, Jamie. Abib, I don't know if you've looked at it because you are in the driver's seat here, so you have the luxury of kind of setting the pace a little bit. Whatever you want to do, they're chasing you. You're not chasing them. Did you look at any of the squads behind you in the standings?
I have not. I've told a few close friends, the position that I'm in, and I've had, a couple of them who are in the FFPC have looked. But I think, being in the sort of kind of driver's seat allows me the luxury of just being able to set my team without having to, implement any strategy regarding, do I need to shoot against or upside and things of that nature. Maybe if I were, a little bit further down the board and 5th or 6th place, I'd probably look ahead of me to try and see if maybe I can, maybe sit, like an Austin Eckler, who I think is, a common player on many of these teams, and put something, put another player in that position in hopes that, he has a bad game. And kind of how we approach DFS with contrarian plays. But yeah, being in the driver's seat, I think I'm really just going to try to focus on my team, not try to introduce too many variables, and just again take the same approach I've been taking since week one.
Yeah, you gotta. I mean, the process that got you here is probably the process that you should take all the way, and I certainly agree with you on that, no question. It makes for a lot of, because I mean, if you were to change your process in week 16, and you come up short or things don't go your way, and then you start questioning, well, why did I switch up what had worked for the first 15 weeks of the season? And if you do it the same way, you won't be asking yourself that question at all. Abib, can you give me a player that you think a lot of high-stakes guys are going to be starting this weekend in championship weekend that you think would be better off actually on their benches, and then a player that will be on a lot of benches in the FFPC this week that you think is actually due for a big-time week?
I guess one player I'd probably say is maybe Raheem Mostert. I think that situation in San Francisco is pretty volatile. Anytime there are multiple backs, not just two, but potentially three, it really to me seems almost like a hot hand approach, and he's been hot for sure. But at some point he's going to cool down, and I wouldn't want that to happen in my week 16. So I think he was sort of kind of a hot waiver wire pickup towards the end, and he's probably been able to carry a number of different teams. I think for me, that's likely someone who I'm probably sitting.
Good stuff there, and I'm curious.
Yeah.
I don't think I asked you this at the top, but Abib, what are your plans for this weekend? Because we got football all day on Saturday, we got football all day on Sunday, and then of course the Monday night game between the Packers and the Vikings. Are you planning on watching it? Are you going to spend time with family, given that we got the holidays coming up here shortly, and you're just going to kind of take an out of sight, out of mind approach to it? What are your plans? How do you feel you're going to be viewing these games this weekend?
Balanced. This is what I would say, I guess. I think Saturday, I'll probably be spending time with friends and family. I had some plans initially. I'm based out of here in Houston, so I'm definitely a Houston Texans fan. So I'll probably watch that game for sure. And then I'll just kind of follow the scores on the phone. And then Sunday will probably, my eyes will probably be glued to the TV. Whether or not that'll be at kind of home in the privacy of my own house or out with friends at a sports bar. I don't necessarily know that just yet, but definitely Sunday will be all about football. And then Monday will be tough. Monday I may just may go try and get a massage or something while the game's on, just because I have no players left on Monday, and it's a tough thing to sit there and watch a game where you have no active players and fantasy points are being accruing. So yeah, that's probably my plans for the weekend.
I remember, and obviously we won't have the same thing going on Monday night, but a couple of years ago, it was 2 or 3 years ago, the final game of the season was, I want to say I don't think it was in Oakland. I think it was Philly, but it was the Eagles and the Raiders. And there was a lot of people that, had a lot of skin in that game. Michael Crabtree and Alshon Jeffrey and all these different, guys that were drafted fairly high in fantasy. And it ended up being the people who were already up at the top of the leaderboard, had already banked their points. They were sweating it quite a bit because they just felt like, well, these guys are going to surpass me. But it was terrible weather. I can't remember if it was rainy or if it was windy or if it was both. And the final score was like 13-6 or like 10-3 or so. It was super low scoring. So all those people who were up at the top of the leaderboard, they never got surpassed because there just wasn't any. I mean, I feel like Alshon Jeffrey or Crabtree, they had a 0 that week, just nothing. One of them might not even add a target. It was crazy. So you never know how these things are going to go. Fantasy football is weird. It's strange. It's a lot of fun. We'll see what happens on Monday night. I want to go through some NFL news with you as we try to help everybody set their lineups properly and give them all the information they can. I want to thank Football Guys, Roto World, and, of course, Rob for tonight's rundown here. I'm going to kick things off with Juju Smith-Schuster. he was able to practice in full not only just Thursday but today as well. He's going up against the Jets this week. The Steelers have not scored more than 23 points in any game since Week 9, and the total in this game at last check was 37 points. So you're getting Smith-Schuster coming back from an injury, catching balls from Duck Hodges. I don't know too many people, Abib, that got to their championship games with Juju Smith-Schuster, but would you roll with him this week, or is it just too much to overcome when you talk about the total, the defense, and the fact that he's coming off an injury, catching passes from Duck Hodges?
Yeah, I'm staying away. So aside from the high stakes, I'm in 5 other leagues, and it's been a really good year. I'm in 4 championships this weekend, and on one of the teams, I actually picked up Juju off of waivers, and have to decide between him and I believe Watson of Tampa Bay. And you can probably guess who I'm going with. I just, when it comes to injuries in the first game back, I've been burned so many times. And in this situation where there's so many different things, with respect to a third-string quarterback, likely a game script that's not going to involve a shootout, a team that's going to be mostly focused on the run that has a great defense. There's just too many negatives for me to, trust him his first game back. I ran into the same situation with T.Y. Hilton a couple of weeks back where he came back. He's playing Houston. He normally torches the Texans, and we saw a situation where he played, half the snaps, if even that. He was not 100%, and I think, it's just not a situation where I want to trust a guy who's telling us he's not 100% and that knee is just not right, but he's going to try and give it a go. If he does well, great, but, I'm going to kick myself if he plays, a quarter of the snaps and runs 3 routes the entire game.
Well, and to me, and I think it's a slam dunk, you play Watson over Smith-Schuster, too. I mean, you being in Houston, you've seen the Texans secondary. It's not exactly a group full of Hall of Famers. And Jameis Winston, say what you will about him from an NFL standpoint, for fantasy-wise, he's been great the last couple of weeks, even with that injured thumb. And Watson is probably their number 2 receiver in a game with a total of 51. So I think Watson is a nice little sneaky sleeper. Definitely playing him over Smith-Schuster. All right, let's try to unpack this Vikings running back situation because it's kind of a mess right now. Dalvin Cook says he's in a good place mentally, and he expects that he is going to be ready for the playoffs if the Vikings make it there, which they should. But against the Packers this week and then next week against the Bears, he may sit out both those games, and if he plays against the Bears in Week 17, it could be if they need that win to try to make the playoffs. And I think the Rams, it kind of depends what they do against the Niners on Saturday night. If they lose, I don't know if the Vikings clinch, but I think they all but clinch a spot on the playoffs, and then maybe we don't see Dalvin Cook till the playoffs. But as far as Monday night goes, Cook did not practice today. Alexander Mattison did not practice today. What about Mike Boone? I don't know too many people. I mean, there are some people in the championship round with Mike Boone. Is this a guy, because it's kind of tricky, Abib. It's a Monday night game. So if you are going to play Boone, you're kind of rolling the dice because if Amir Abdullah is announced as the starter or somehow Dalvin Cook is, practices tomorrow and he's playing or something like that, then you're kind of out of luck with that because Boone might just be a bit player or a supporting cast guy. Do you think he is going to be the man on Monday Night Football, and is he worth the wait? Is he worth the risk?
It's a good question. I think it depends on your roster, depends on, what you're, fighting for, depends on your opponent roster, if it's just a head-to-head matchup. I could see a lot of scenarios playing out here. I think, the tendency of us fantasy players is to sort of kind of wish for the best. We see a running back, third-string running back who potentially has the opportunity. We assume that he's going to produce numbers that are close to, the number 1 running back in that system, and that's not always the case. And so there are a couple different things that I think are not necessarily red flags, but things that we got to consider. One is, he didn't really receive any targets, if correct me if I'm wrong. And so if you're playing in a PPR league, I think that could potentially hurt you. Another tendency is to sort of kind of take a player and then, just completely bash on him. I saw it, quite often during the draft season with players like Carlos Hyde, where they were just completely afterthought, and we were told not to draft them and things like that. And so I can see that situation with Amir Abdullah. He's not produced obviously very well since he's been in the NFL, but he's maintained a spot on that roster. And so at the very least, he could be their third down back. And so that not only takes away carries, but, maybe he breaks off, a couple, runs here or there, and maybe he works in the mix a little bit. And then the fullback, I'm blanking on his name, C.J. Ham, actually saw a number of different targets last week. So it could be a situation where, yes, he could go off. He could potentially, get a number of red zone carries and score one or two TDs, maybe have 70, 80 total yards. But what if he doesn't score a TD? What if it continues and he doesn't, catch any passes in the, out of the backfield? And so, maybe looking at a situation where, he gets 18 touches, but maybe it's only, 80 to 70 or 70 to 80 yards, so you get 7 to 8 points. So I think there's a lot of, situations to sort of kind of think about with that. But the upside is definitely there. I know in a couple of my championship leagues where I own Cook, because I own Cook, he will definitely be in the starting lineup with the thought that if Cook does decide to play, I can plug him in, and I have that sort of kind of leverage or safety net.
I don't know. This is another one, too, that we'll talk about with Kerryon Johnson. He's expected to return this weekend. We don't know if it's going to be limited snaps. We don't know how much he's going to play, if at all. But it's a meaningless game for Detroit as they take on Denver. Kerryon Johnson, for anybody who kept him on their roster since he went on IR, they were hoping to play him in Week 16. You can. I just really question how much volume and how much fantasy production there's going to be from Kerryon Johnson, Abib.
Agreed. Even when he was healthy, they were, splitting up backfield work. He didn't get, he wasn't getting as many targets out of the backfield as we would hope. And when the coach comes out and says we're going to be careful, oftentimes coaches aren't really wanting to give us much information, but that to me is very telling. So in this situation, I'm 100% staying away. I can't think of too many situations where I'm plugging in Kerryon Johnson.
Moving on to the Buccaneers, we talked a little bit about Justin Watson. Chris Godwin was officially ruled out for this weekend's game against the Texans. Brashad Perriman, I can't believe I'm saying this, but is he a top 20 option this week? Because it is the guy who washed out in Baltimore. Then he scores the 3 touchdowns last week. You already talked about you're going to play Justin Watson over Juju Smith-Schuster, but Brashad Perriman is looking great. Is a great start this weekend. I already said the total on the game is 51. Winston's been throwing it all over the field. I think Perriman, more often than not, should be in your starting lineups. And it's going to, like you said before, it's going to depend upon what, your lineup looks like. But if you need a flex, maybe you lost Dalvin Cook or somebody like that this week and you're not going to be able to play him, Brashad Perriman looks like a really good flex, man.
Yeah, I agree. Trust me, I wish I had Perriman. I wish he was available instead of Watson. But you're right. It's a tricky situation because we have this guy that's been in the league for a number of years and has just failed to produce. And a lot of his production has just kind of come on these long bombs. And I think, look at the teams that he's faced, especially last week against just a very, very bad Detroit defense. If he doesn't get one of those long bombs, we're going to be in a situation. And I think this is just one of those tough situations that's very tough. But I'm in agreement. I think you plug him in and you hope for the best. Hopefully he gets the targets and the volume. Hopefully he's not just limited to running 9 routes and deep routes. I saw a couple of plays where, they target him around the line of scrimmage. So I think if he's, running, if they're focused on trying to get him the ball as their true number one, he's someone that could potentially win a lot of people, a championship.
Abib, let's move on to Carolina. This is one that's affecting me because I have a lot of DJ Moore this year. I have a little bit of Greg Olsen, and he practiced in full. Looks like he's going to be going. And I have a good amount of Christian McCaffrey. Will Grier is now the guy that's captaining the ship for Carolina when they take on Indianapolis this weekend. This move it should have a ripple effect throughout the entire Carolina offense. How big of a ripple effect is this? Are you considering benching Greg Olsen? Because I guess the way I look at it, you're playing McCaffrey no matter what. I think that's obvious. DJ Moore, I think you still got to play no matter what the way he's been playing. I think it comes down to Curtis Samuel and Greg Olsen. Does this make them more – I mean, it certainly makes them less likely to start them. But would you feel comfortable starting Curtis Samuel? And I should say that Curtis Samuel is officially listed questionable for this game as he was a midweek downgrade, so maybe he should be out of your lineups. But as far as him and Greg Olsen, how much does this Will Grier announcement affect your plans for your Carolina Panthers skill position players in championship week?
Yeah, to be honest, I've been kind of looking forward to Grier taking over for Allen. Allen's been really bad. I mean, really bad of late. A lot of DJ Moore's production has kind of come in garbage time, and I guess you can say that for a lot of fantasy positions. But I honestly, I don't think it changes much. With regards to Curtis Samuel, my plan was to always stay away from him. Regardless this week, just because of the potential, the questionable tag and the potential injury. Olsen's a tough one. I think there's always a thought that young QBs tend to, want to kind of home in on the tight end as a safety blanket. So there's that to consider. The other thing to consider, though, too, is that I think they really want to see what they have in Ian Thomas. So how much run does Olsen get? How many snaps does he see? Is going to be tough. But the big part, I think, when it comes to CMC and DJ Moore, you start them. I think there's some talk that they're really trying to get CMC 1,000 and 1,000 in terms of rushing and passing yards. So they may focus in on that, and I think also 100 receptions. So we may just see a lot of dump offs by design, but I like DJ Moore. I think this Grier will push it downfield. From what I hear, he's a little bit more aggressive and more of a pocket passer. But we'll see. I don't know about you, but I tend to see, for a lot of these QBs, their first game, they tend to show out a bit and tend to produce until teams start to get tapes and are able to kind of scheme against them. So maybe that's the situation here. A lot of unknowns, though.
Well, and you're right about the aggression, too. And what do the Panthers have to lose at this point, too? So you put Will Grier in there. If he throws a couple of picks, okay, who cares? But if he's pushing the ball down the field and he's making big plays and this Carolina offense is really taking off, well, then that's how Will Grier potentially could be the starting quarterback for this team in 2020. We'll see. A long way to go before we get there. You were just mentioning Olsen and Thomas. Let's keep the conversation on another pair of tight end teammates, this one out in Los Angeles with Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. Everett actually practiced in full both yesterday and today, and he's not on the injury report anymore, according to the Rams.com. And this affects Tyler Higbee because, remember, this is the guy that the Rams locked up with the extension earlier this offseason, and now it's Everett coming back, who had some really good games this season already for the Rams. And people are like, why couldn't he come back in Week 17? Why does he have to come back now? Because I think this puts a dent in Tyler Higbee's fantasy production, and I think people that were planning on starting him as maybe a low-end, like maybe a top 10, top 12 guy, they might be bumping him down a little bit more, and all of a sudden maybe they have a better option on their offense.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it does hurt him in terms of potentially reduced snap counts, as well as potentially reduced target share. His sort of kind of emergence over the last few weeks has been really remarkable. A lot of things I think have gone into that in terms of McVay needing to feeling a need to change his offensive scheme because they really weren't getting much production on the outside zone runs. Defenses had seemed to just figured them out, so they kind of moved to playing Higbee more, I guess. And instead of going 3 and 4 wide receivers sets, and in some games it's helped out, and last week not so much. But a lot of the teams that they played recently, I think, have played more of the sort of kind of cover 3, where they've just basically let Higbee sort of kind of roam free, giving up the underneath passes. And so, if I recall, I think San Francisco runs a similar defense, so it'll be interesting. So you still have that, but yeah, I think with Everett coming back, it's going to hurt. So depends on what options you have, I guess, if you're going to start him or not.
Yeah, if you own Higbee, I think you got to take a second look at your other options at tight end this week, because you might have a better one now all of a sudden on your roster.
Yeah.
Abib Agbetoba, the leader in the Footballguys Players Championship, joining me here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour this week. We have about roughly 10 minutes or so left in the show, Abib. I want to get to some start-sit questions that we got emailed in this week from some listeners. I'm going to kick things off with Walt in Jersey City, New Jersey. He says, I have a tough call in championship week. Which Brown do I start, John or Marquise? Thanks, guys. That is Walt in Jersey City, New Jersey. So this week, Marquise Brown for the Ravens is actually on the road at Cleveland. And then you have John Brown, who is actually on the road as well. He is in Foxborough taking on the New England Patriots on Saturday afternoon. If he's got to play one of them, Abib, which one is it, John Brown or Marquise Brown for you?
I lean Marquise Brown in this situation. Just don't like John Brown's matchup. He's playing one of the better corners in the NFL. I think I see it more as a Cole Beasley week than anything else, and Devin Singletary. So give me Marquise Brown, and you hope that he catches a 50-yard touchdown.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, the big play potential is there for both of them, no question. But for me, it's very difficult. I think Marquise Brown is much more likely to spring like you said, like a 50-yard touchdown than John Brown is against Stephon Gilmore. And Josh Allen, I mean, I think the exception is probably last week, although Cole Beasley didn't have a terrible week last week. But outside of that, I mean, Josh Allen's really had eyes for Cole Beasley over the last month of the season, and I think that you're right. I think it continues this week again. And I would be playing Marquise Brown over John Brown there as well. Quarterback question here, I believe. Yeah, quarterback question from Kenny in Jonesboro, Arkansas. He writes, this is a good one. Am I crazy to start Ryan Fitzpatrick over Aaron Rodgers this week? Ryan Fitzpatrick is taking on, I believe, the Bengals, if I'm remembering this correctly. Miami taking on they have the Bengals at home this week, and then Aaron Rodgers going on the road on Monday Night Football against the Vikings. So this is interesting. So he's not first of all, I'll answer the easy part of the question. No, I don't think you're crazy. Now the question is, would you, with everything on the line in Week 16, are you playing Fitzpatrick over the two-time MVP?
And I'm in complete agreement. I don't think you're crazy. Fitzpatrick has been great this season. He's also added some rushing. They don't have much of a run game, so they're having to do a lot through the air. Cincinnati is not a scary matchup, although I will add in that I think that defense is better than people think, particularly the secondary. And that team in general, they're no longer sort of kind of in tank mode. They're in pride mode where they're playing a lot harder. The last thing as well is I keep hearing things about some tropical storm that may be coming in. So that's just something to make sure we, don't get too crazy about the weather. But if it's a tropical storm, definitely something to consider. That being said, me personally, I'm not sitting Aaron Rodgers for Ryan Fitzpatrick, and I'm not someone who looks at, I'm completely, against, going with name over production, but just something about that Minnesota Vikings defense. Their backfield, I don't think it's the same as it's been in years past. I know the history with Rodgers and the head coach in Minnesota in terms of his lack of production, but I feel like if Green Bay is gonna win, they're gonna need to do it through the air. I don't think they're gonna be able to run like they have been over the last few weeks. So give me Aaron Rodgers. Tough question though.
Full agreement. Full agreement there. It's difficult, okay, but for me, it's Rodgers for me, and here's why. Number one, I think that if you look at the Packers so far this season, they've been flip-flopping weeks as far as how they've been winning and how they've been moving the ball. One week it's Aaron Jones, it's an Aaron Jones week. Then the next week it's Rodgers throwing it through the air. And I think this week is a Rodgers game. If you look at it's weird because the Vikings have sunk so much draft assets into that secondary, into those corners with Mackenzie Alexander and Xavier Rhodes. But they're not. They don't perform. They have not been performing like first-round picks. And I feel like if there's a get-right game for Alan Lazard or Marquez Valdez-Scantling or Geronimo Allison, this is it. I think Devontae Adams goes crazy. I think Aaron Rodgers, his floor is probably like 2 touchdowns and 250 yards. I think, quite frankly, he does better than that. So and the other thing too, and I don't know if you ever look at your fantasy lineups, I would rather die with my best man, playing quarterback rather than a guy who is hot or rather than a guy who had a good matchup. Like I just feel more comfortable with that. So I'm going to play Rodgers over Fitzpatrick.
I'm in 100% agreement. You got a long off season to think about that decision you just made. Now, let me die. Let my team die with Aaron Rodgers over Ryan Fitzpatrick.
I am not mentally strong enough to play Fitzpatrick over Rodgers and then deal with the repercussions from that if it backfires in my face. I'm just not. Josh in Gainesville, Florida. Let's go to him, Abib. He writes, "Hey, Balky and Abib, with Jacobs now out this week, I have an interesting conundrum. Do I play his backup in DeAndre Washington, or do I roll with Raheem Mostert instead? Happy holidays." That is from Josh in Gainesville, Florida. DeAndre Washington, you would think, is going to step in and get the lion's share of the touches for Oakland this week as they are on the road against the Chargers. Raheem Mostert is at home on primetime football on Saturday night hosting the Rams. So if he has the decision there, obviously he can't play Jacobs anymore. Are you playing Washington or are you playing Mostert?
I like the term you would think, yes, because we see the problem is I think is we only have one data point. We have one game where Jacob is missed, and we saw DeAndre Washington get a bulk of the carries and then also get very, very involved in the passing game. So my decision based off of just volume alone would be DeAndre Washington. I've kind of already talked about Raheem Mostert and sort of kind of a three-headed back committee. If he doesn't get a touchdown, then it really, really kills you. At least hopefully with DeAndre Washington, even if he doesn't score, hopefully, he gets you 50 to 60 yards and, and 3 to 4 receptions, maybe for 20 to 30 yards. The Chargers defense is getting healthy. I think they're a lot better than what they looked like last week. When your offense turns it over 6+ times or however many times they turn it over, it's hard to look good, but that's the one, negative. But give me the guy with the volume. Give me DeAndre Washington.
Yeah, and you mentioned that too. And normally I would say, well, his team is a 7.5-point underdog on the road. Like why it's not going to work out for Washington to be running the football. But the thing is, he catches so many passes, and for whatever reason, I still don't get it. When Josh Jacobs was in there, he was getting Jalen Richard was getting the third down work. Well, when Washington was in there, Washington was getting the third down. So he's on the field the whole time. So, and if they do have to catch up at the end, there could be a lot of garbage dump-offs there for DeAndre Washington. So it's close for me. I mean, if you like Mostert, by all means play him. But if it was my team, it would be Washington, and that's who I would go with. Let's move on to a tight end question here from, let's see, who is this from here? This is from Tony in Denver. How's it going, guys? I can only play one of these tight ends for all the marbles. Jared Cook or Mike Gesicki? Who's the moneymaker? Thank you for the email, Tony in Denver. All right, so for reference's sake, Mike Gesicki, we already mentioned that Bengals-Dolphins game. Gesicki is at home against the Bengals. Jared Cook is taking on, I believe, the Titans, if I'm remembering correctly. He is taking on Jared Cook is at Tennessee this week. Yes. So which one would you rather play between Gesicki and Cook, Abib?
I'm gonna go with Cook. I mean, he has the floor and the upside, as we've seen. I like Gesicki. I like Gesicki quite a bit, especially this week going up against the Bengals. I think he's a very athletic tight end. I think he's going to be, one of those sort of late draft sleepers for next year when it comes to tight ends. But in the championship round, give me Cook, better quarterback, and at least right now, I think a better player.
I'm going to lean towards Cook as well. I was never a big fan of Gesicki coming into the pre-draft process. He's proved me wrong a little bit because he's had some pretty good ball-out games. But I also think that Michael Thomas does not go as crazy as he did last week. And Jared Cook could certainly be more involved in the passing game this week. So razor thin for me. I could easily see starting Gesicki, but I'm going to roll with Cook here as well. Final question of the night as we are up against it. This is from Sam in Pittsburgh. Through blood, sweat, and tears, I've been able to get into my championship game despite blowing my first-round pick on Le'Veon Bell. Do I bench him at flex this week in favor of Michael Gallup against that terrible Philly secondary? I love your show and listen every week. That is Sam in Pittsburgh. Obviously, probably a former Steelers fan or a current Steelers fan that could not quit Le'Veon Bell. Takes him in the first round this year. So, if Bell has not lived up to expectations, Abib. Has he fallen so far that you would play Michael Gallup, who had a great matchup last week and just could not take advantage of it? Would you be playing Gallup or Le'Veon Bell this week? And for the listeners' sake, I'll let everybody know, Le'Veon Bell is at home against the Steelers, potential revenge game, and then Michael Gallup is on the road at Philadelphia, as Sam pointed out in his email.
Oh, this is such a hard question. A lot of this kind of comes down to Dak's health and his arm. Sounds like he's going to play, but how much is he going to be able to throw? And that I don't think anyone knows. That type of injury, I guess, is more related to pain tolerance in terms of kind of how much he's going to be able to push the ball. But I could easily see them leaning on Zeke and sort of kind of moving away from the high pass volume offense that they've kind of been over the entire year. So as much as I do not like this matchup at all, and I don't think that Bell has enough juice in the tank against this vaunted Steelers defense, even for the revenge narrative, I'm going to go Bell. We just got to, hopefully, I think right now he just has to sort of kind of share the backfield with Ty Montgomery. I believe Bilal Powell is out or at least questionable, so we got to, that'll kind of help you out a bit. But hopefully he catches a couple of passes out of the backfield. This offense, the Jets offense, just see so few red zone, opportunities throughout each game. I think it's one of the lowest in the NFL. So, him getting a touchdown is, highly unlikely. But again, hopefully he produces, enough yards on the ground, and if you're in a PPR, hopefully you can get 4 to 5 catches to get you a stable floor. But yeah, give me Bell.
I think the tiebreaker for me in these is always volume, and it's always touches. And for Michael Gallup, who has had great flashes this week, the two things that stand out for me is why was he not successful? Why did he not even put up an average game in Week 15 in a plus matchup? And now his quarterback has an AC joint problem. I think those two things stick out. Whereas if the Jets are going to move the ball at all, it's going to be with Le'Veon Bell. Robbie Anderson is questionable, expected to play, but we'll see. If they're going to move the ball at all, it's going to be through Le'Veon Bell. So I am going to go with Bell, and hopefully you can win a championship with Le'Veon Bell in your starting lineup. What a story that would be after drafting him in the first round. That would be awesome. We'll see what happens there. Best of luck to you, Sam, in Pittsburgh, and best of luck to you too, Abib. This was fun. This hour flew by.
Yeah.
You were very entertaining, very informative, and listen, man. I hope you have a great weekend with friends and family and football. I know it's going to be stressful at times. My only advice to you is trust your gut and enjoy the moment. This is something that you'll take with you for a while, and I just hope that, I hope the ball bounces your way and you end up cashing the 6-figure grand prize.
Yeah.
But I just hope you enjoy the process and the journey as much as you would the reward as well.
Eric, thank you for having me. This is great. Believe it or not, I was able to sort of kind of think through some of the tough lineup decisions that I have. Yeah, like you said, hopefully I'm able to come up on top. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Well, enjoy the holidays, dude. I certainly loved having you on. Best of luck to you this weekend. We'll talk again soon.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Abib Agbetoba, screwing it up now. Abib Agbetoba, ladies and gentlemen, the leader in the 2019 Football Guys Players Championship, heading into Week 16. Good stuff from him. What a show. Hopefully we helped you out tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I know the Dizzle wasn't here to tell me what an idiot I was and are, but hopefully you still enjoyed the show just the same, and hopefully you have the good fantasy knowledge that you need to sit and start on those lineups and whatever players you're considering here as you try to bring home fantasy titles. I want to thank Abib Agbetoba. I want to thank the FFPC, Rob Bryce, and, of course, each and every one of you for listening here on this holiday weekend on Friday, December 20th. Don't forget Aaron McGurian on that High Stakes Lowdown, rotoviz.com/podcast, Apple Podcast, Blue Wire Podcast Network. I can tell you this. The next episode of the HSLD will come out the day after Christmas. However, we are recording that show on Monday morning. Now, the interesting part about that is obviously we're running into the holidays, kind of putting a monkey wrench into the schedule. We're recording the HSLD on Monday morning. It won't be out until Thursday. Why is this interesting? Because the guest this week on the HSLD is the leader in the 2019 FFPC main event. Mike Pareca is going to be on the show, and he's going to kind of know where he stands in trying to win this $500,000 with, I believe he's just going to have Aaron Jones going on Monday Night Football. So we're recording it on Monday morning because of our holiday schedules. It's going to be weird, and it's going to be fun, and it's going to be one of the more interesting podcasts I've ever recorded. That will be out on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, Thursday morning, bright and early. Check that out, rotoviz.com/podcast. That is going to be fun. I don't want to keep overselling it, but it's going to be an interesting podcast. All right, the FFPC Playoff Challenge is live, as well as the Football Guys Playoff Challenge as well. MyFFPC.com is where you can sign up for those. $500,000 grand prize in the FFPC Playoff Challenge, $100,000 grand prize in the Football Guys one, only $35 to enter that, so make sure you're checking those out. Good luck with Championship Week, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with us all season long. We're not going anywhere. We'll be back with another show next week.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com that was broadcast live and heard around the world. Eric and Dave will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from a guest much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
We're on the team Explorer, even more so if we on tour. Me and E explore the country, wondering about the evening before. Trying to explain where the time went, while other rappers find a studio to grind in.
By the way, special programming announcement. We will be doing a show next week, obviously, as well. We don't take Fridays off here on the HSFF Hour, unless I'm taking a Friday off, then we do. That won't happen this week. And no Dizzle again next week. So another special guest. Hopefully enjoyed Abib tonight. I know I did. Seriously, I hope you bring home fantasy titles this week. Enjoy the holiday weekend with friends, family. We really appreciate all the support that you give this show, and we'll keep cranking out podcasts as long as you keep listening. Thanks so much. Good luck in your championship games.